Welcome. My name is Charles Goodnight. Now, you may have heard me called the father of the Texas Panhandle, or some other such nonsense. Well, I have been called a lot of things, and usually with good reason, because I have done a lot of things. Some bear talking about, some do not. But I do suppose most folks probably do think of me mostly as a Texas cattleman. What might surprise a lot of those folks is I was not born in Texas, nor did I start out in life to be a cattleman. I was born up in Illinois, and my people were farmers. So now some of you are wondering how in the world a farm boy from Illinois got to be known as a Texas cattleman. Tell you the truth, sometimes I wonder myself. I suppose the best place to start my story would be at the beginning. I was born March 5th, 1836 in Macoupin County, Illinois, not too far from the Missouri line. Now, that place will probably not be familiar to you, but that date should be. You're right. I had no say in the matter, but I've always been proud of the fact I was born the very same time the Republic of Texas was getting born. Yes, sir. I never knew my dad much. He died when I was 5. Doctors called it pneumonia. From what I could see as a young boy, he worked himself to death, trying to scratch a living for his wife and his kids out of that stubborn Illinois dirt. My mom's brother, he took over managing the estate. Mismanaging would be the better word. It really left Mom in kind of a bad way. And to keep the family together, she married a neighboring farmer by the name of Hiram Doherty. Something she would come to regret. It was thanks to Mr. Doherty that I did have the opportunity of going to school, briefly. Now, school itself, I never really took to. A lot of folks thought I was lazy. I was really restless. My mind was just always off someplace else. But while I did not take to school, I did take to learning. And that was thanks in a great part to Ms. Jane Hageman, my teacher. Somehow or other, she inspired me to want to learn all that I could about everything that I could. And I've always regretted that circumstances cut my time with her very short. It would turn out that my schoolhouse would be the prairies, the mountains, the rivers, and my teachers would be the fox, the eagle, the snake, anything that walked or swam or ran or flied. I wanted to learn the things they knew. I was fascinated mostly by their unerring sense of direction, how they could, wherever they were, they could always find their way home. A skill that would one day come in handy. Now, I say my time was cut short. That also was thanks to Mr. Doherty. It is now the 1840s, and all Mr. Doherty could talk about, in fact, almost anybody could talk about at that time, was this amazing new country called Texas. Acres and acres of wonderful land almost free for the taking. a chance to be part of something new, something grand, to start a whole new life. And yeah, I was as excited as anybody else about that. So we loaded everything we had into 2 wagons. I sat bareback on a mare we call Blaze, and that is how we started out on the long journey from Illinois down here to Texas. We crossed Arkansas, we crossed the Red River, and we came on south, and we arrived in December of 1845. We arrived at a place called Dallas. Now, today Dallas is a majestic city. I will tell you what I saw of Dallas in 1845. 1 log building, 1 ferry boat that was supposed to take people across the Trinity River. Now I say supposed to because apparently it had been a very dry year. I don't know. I do know we rode our wagons up the ramp onto one end of that ferry boat, and we rode our wagons down the ramp on the other end of that ferry, and we found ourselves on the west bank of the Trinity River. They still made us pay the fare. But one thing did happen that day that I will never forget. Standing there on the west bank of the Trinity River, I saw my first buffalo. And not a buffalo. A herd of the most powerful, majestic creatures I think I had ever seen. I admired buffalo from that day on. We traveled south looking for a place to settle. We did not see another human being for I don't know how long. Finally, we arrived at a settlement called Natchez on the Brazos. Old Natchez, some people called it. And Mr. Doherty, he rented a farm there, and Mother, well, she did her best to try to make a home. Unfortunately, before too long, around 1847 or so, my mom and Mr. Doherty parted ways for reasons, let's just say for reasons. But once again, Mother was alone with 4, soon to be 5 hungry mouths to feed. We traveled some trying to find a place, but it fell to me at 11 with my grand 6 months of schooling, and my older brother Elijah at the ripe old age of 15. It fell to us to try and support the family. And so as we moved around, we hired ourselves out to whoever would hire us for whatever they would pay us to do. Some of the jobs were good, others were different. Now, it was during this time also that I came to know an old Caddo warrior named Caddo Jake. He would come to our home from time to time, and in what little free time I might have, he would take me out into the woods and the fields, and he taught me how to read signs, how to live off of what nature provided. He taught me things that little did I know would come in very, very important to me in my future life. Things I had really wanted to learn all along. Things that would become even more important as the years went by. One interesting thing, though, that did happen, about 1851, we had settled in Port Sullivan. And there in Port Sullivan, there was a horse racing syndicate. Now, at 15, I was still very light built. In fact, holding a saddle, I still barely tipped the scales at 90 pounds. So with my low weight, my love of horses, my love of riding, and my skill, I was a natural for a jockey. And I loved that. I loved the riding, I loved the racing. But the whole atmosphere that surrounded that, the drunkenness, the fighting, the gambling, that's just not the life I wanted at that time. So as soon as I drew my pay, I headed back home. And we continued to do what we could. 1853, my mom, well, she finally got it right. She married a Methodist preacher, a fellow named Adam Sheik. Now, I was not much of a churchgoer, but if there ever was such a thing as what they call a good Christian man, this Mr. Sheik, he was as near faultless as any man I had ever known. He was good to my mom, he was good for my mom. But I found myself, though, not only with a new stepdad, but a new stepbrother, John Wesley Sheik. I called him Wes. And Wes was a little older than I was, but we got it on really well. And we looked around, we decided we had a couple of head of cattle that could pull a wagon. We had a good strong wagon. People needed supplies, so we set up a freighting business to help bring money in for the family. And we were doing pretty well at that. We were. But, you know, as young men do, we got restless. We were ready to make our fortune. And in the 1850s, the big news everywhere, of course, was California and gold. And we figured out real quick, if that's where the money is, that's where we want to be. So we headed north toward Fort Belknap with intentions of then getting on the Immigrant Trail, which was the direct line out to California. As fortune would have it, before we got to Fort Belknap, we encountered my older sister who had gotten married, and her husband sat us down and tried to talk a little sense into us. Said, boys, you can go all the way out there to California, and what happens if you get there and all the gold is already found? Now you can do that, he said, or I'm looking at this big plot of land. I'm really wanting to expand and do something right here in Texas, and you could stay and be a part of that. And we did. We signed on with him and started this land contract, but unfortunately that fell through. As we were pondering what to do, we were still headed for Belknap now. We came across Wes's brother-in-law, a fellow named Clyburn Varner. Now, Mr. Varner, he had his own idea. He said, boys, I have 400 odd cattle over here that I really don't have time to deal with. He had other ventures going on. He said, if you'll take charge of those cattle, graze them wherever you want to, you're in charge. Every fourth calf is yours to keep. Then raise your own herd. Now, we could tell real quick that was not going to be fast money, but it was long-term security. It had promise. So, yeah, we signed on a 10-year contract with Mr. Varner, and we took his cattle, and we began looking for good grazing land. Now, the first year, we counted 4 calves between us. Break those up by the pound and sell them off, that would have been $90 to show for a year's work. Fortunately, during that time, while Wes had looked after the cattle, I had continued the freighting business. So we did have income coming in, and we continued along that way as we looked for better grazing land. And we found probably the best land around over in the Black Creek area of the Keechee Valley, there in Palo Pinto County. And we settled there, and time went on. Of course, each year the herd would grow. Every year a few more, until eventually we had a pretty nice herd. While we were there in the Keechee Valley, I fulfilled a dream. We built a fairly nice cabin there, and I brought my mom and my stepdad there to live with us, made my mom a home where she wouldn't have to worry where the next meal was coming from and would not have to work herself to death like my dad had. It was also there in the Keechee Valley that I met a fella named Oliver Loving. Now, Oliver was an older man. He was experienced. He had been driving cattle and working cattle At this point, he was running a sort of a trading post, but he knew cattle, and he became sort of a mentor to help us, and became a very dear friend. And little did I know he was going to play an even greater part in my life later on. Everything was going good. All of a sudden, Wes got the idea he wanted to get married. He got married in 1860, and off he went for a while. And of course, I quit the freighting business, and I found myself in earnest in charge of a sizable herd. Our own share had grown to 100 head. So it would be fair to say that was the day that this Illinois farm boy found himself full earnest Texas cattleman. Now, I would love to tell you everything went wonderful from then on, but fairy tales are for storybooks. Even during the events that I've described to you, trouble was already brewing. The Comanche, the Kiowa, who had lived on these lands for generations, were increasingly upset by the encroachment of us outsiders. And they were even more upset by the government's plan to solve the problem by moving them onto a reservation. And they had begun to make their displeasure known in some increasingly violent ways, until something had to come to a head. And, well, that's a story for another time. I've already talked far more than I'm accustomed to. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll come back and we'll talk some more. But for now, I bid you good day.